You're ready for a comeback. And with Purdue Global, you can do more than take classes. You can take charge of your story, of your career, of your life. Earn a degree you can be proud of and get an education employers respect. It's time, your time, not just to go back to school, but to come back and move forward with Purdue Global, Purdue's online university for working adults. Start your comeback at purdueglobal.edu.
Sometimes life can seem hard and tough to navigate, but what may seem like the smallest tasks, such as getting out of bed or even brushing your teeth, should be celebrated as a win. And State Farm is here to help you celebrate all your wins. The State Farm Personal Price Plan helps you create an affordable price just for you. Talk to a State Farm agent today to learn how you can bundle and save with the Personal Price Plan. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices are based on rating plans that vary by state. Coverage options are selected by the customer. Availability, amount of discounts and savings, and eligibility vary by state.
Hello! From Wonder Media Network, I'm Jenny Kaplan, and this is Womanica. This month we're talking about go-getters, women who purposefully, or in some cases accidentally, acquired life-changing wealth, good fortune, or influence. Today's Womanican is often remembered for her heartfelt poetry and as a voice for the oppressed. Beyond her literary achievements, she was a woman who channeled her passions to achieve change in Puerto Rico and beyond. Please welcome Julia de Burgos. Julia was born on February 17, 1914, in the rural barrio of Santa Cruz in Carolina, Puerto Rico. She came from mixed German, African, and Spanish origins. Julia was the firstborn. She had 12 younger siblings. Julia grew up in poverty. 6 of her siblings died during childhood. Her father had a farm near Carolina, and her mother was a housewife who exchanged the fruits and vegetables from her garden for cash or other goods in town. The family struggled to make ends meet. But this didn't stop Julia from experiencing Puerto Rico at its fullest. When she joined her mother to do laundry, the other women in town told stories about water nymphs and female spirits that lived in the island's rivers and lakes. She fostered a love of nature through her frequent trips into the mountains with her father. As she got older and stronger, Julia climbed the trees to find peace and let her imagination run wild. In 1928, Julia received a scholarship to attend University High School in San Juan. The whole family left their rural roots behind to relocate to the urban center. In school, Julia excelled academically and athletically. She was quite tall and ran track, swam, and played basketball. She graduated early and enrolled at the University of Puerto Rico. At 19 years old, she completed her 2-year teaching certificate. Julia worked as an elementary school teacher in a small town in the mountains of Puerto Rico. But something deeper stirred within her. For Julia, writing was liberation. She'd been writing poetry since she was a little girl, but in the 1930s, she began to share it publicly in magazines and newspapers. When she was 20 years old, Julia married Ruben Rodriguez Beauchamp. But the marriage had its challenges, namely economic and political instability across the island. Julia joined the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party to fight for Puerto Rico's independence from the United States. In October of 1936, she gave a speech titled "Women Facing the Pain of the Nation" to encourage other Puerto Rican women to join the fight. Julia finished her first collection of poetry in 1935. But she didn't think the poems were good enough to be published. Except for one. Rio Grande de Loíza, or Great Loíza River. The poem celebrates the beauty of her homeland's landscape while also highlighting the legacy of conquest and slavery that marks Puerto Rico's history. It would go on to become one of her most famous poems. Julia and Ruben's marriage deteriorated and they divorced in 1937. Instead of going back to her maiden name, Julia took the opportunity to make a statement. Usually, when women got married, they would add the word "de" in front of their husband's last name. It was a signifier of marital status. The word literally means of or belonging to. Julia added "de" before her own last name. By changing her name to de Burgos, Julia made a symbolic gesture. She belonged to herself. At 24 years old, Julia took this new emboldened identity and self-published her first collection of poems called Poema en 20 Surcos, or Poem in 20 Furrows. Julia's poems captured the hearts of Puerto Ricans, and they also pushed boundaries, challenging traditional gender roles and societal norms. In her 1938 poem, I Was My Own Path, she defiantly declared her independence from societal expectations. Julia's second collection, translated as Song of the Simple Truth, won the literary prize from the Ateneo Puertorriqueño, the premier Puerto Rican cultural institution of the time. But not everyone embraced Julia's verses. Through her poetry, she explored complex issues like colonialism, racism, feminism, and personal freedom. She embraced themes that others were afraid to speak about. Julia envisioned an inclusive, diverse Puerto Rico. Julia herself, a divorced, single, working-class woman of African descent, was often alienated by her own community. Her vision for Puerto Rico was much more inclusive than the island's direction at the time. After her divorce, Julia began a relationship with Juan Grullón, an intellectual. The pair moved to New York in early 1940, and when Julia left Puerto Rico, she promised never to return. Julia and Juan spent 2 years in Cuba, but Juan's family didn't support the relationship, and Julia returned to New York in March of 1942. Back in New York, Julia supported herself and her siblings through her poetry. She published poems in local Spanish newspapers. These poems conveyed her loneliness as an immigrant and how important it was to find community. The poems resonated with Puerto Ricans. She also worked as the art and culture editor for the Spanish newspaper Pueblos Hispanos. Julia married again in 1943, but that marriage also ended in divorce. Life in New York was hard, and Julia turned to alcohol to cope. Her drinking led her to develop multiple health issues, and she was in and out of the hospital for treatment. On July 5, 1953, police officers found Julia unconscious on the street. She had no identification on her person. They brought her to Harlem Hospital, where she passed away the next day. She was just 39 years old. Because they had no way to identify her, they buried Julia in a common plot in the city's public cemetery. Eventually, Julia's family tracked her down and found her grave. Julia's body was exhumed and relocated to the municipal cemetery in her birthplace of Carolina. In 1954, Julia's sister posthumously published her final collection of poetry, El Mar y Tú, or The Sea and You. After her death, Julia became a national hero in Puerto Rico. She's remembered as the forerunner of the Nuyorican poetry movement in New York. Her legacy and influence live on through parks, schools, and cultural centers in Puerto Rico, New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago, all bearing her name. All month, we're talking about go-getters. For more information, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Womanica Podcast. Special thanks to Liz Kaplan, my favorite sister and co-creator. Talk to you tomorrow.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids instantly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy, knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Sign up for Greenlight today at greenlight.com/iHeart.
When you choose to earn your degree online from Southern New Hampshire University, you're saying yes to new opportunities and to new adventures. You're saying yes to something big, something you've always wanted to do. If earning your degree is one of your goals this new year, SNHU can help you get there. With low online tuition, no set class times, and multiple term starts per year, you can set the pace that works for you and save money along the way. Visit snhu.edu today to get started.